Welcome to Hydrogen Rising, a bi-weekly podcast created and hosted by the global law firm K&L Gates that brings you analysis of critical, cutting-edge issues impacting the global hydrogen market. We look forward to your engagement and feedback. And of course, don't hesitate to reach out if you have ideas about new topics you'd like us to cover.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Hydrogen Rising. I'm Sandi Safro, and I'll be co-hosting this episode with my co-host, David Wochner. Our episode today is going to focus on how regions and localities are thinking about and planning for a hydrogen economy at scale. We've talked in prior episodes about the notion of a hub or a regional approach to the development of hydrogen at scale. This approach has several advantages, including shorter transportation required from production to consumption and the potential to aggregate demand, which can allow for economies of scale for production and transportation to emerge. We've also mentioned in prior episodes that Australia is pursuing a hydrogen hub model, and we actually may start to see a similar approach emerge here in the United States. We are very pleased to be joined today by two guests who are working to implement hydrogen solutions in the Washington, D.C. area. First, we have Rick Moore, who is Vice President of Climate and Energy at Connected DMV. Prior to joining Connected DMV, Rick was with the Washington, D.C. area utility company called Washington Gas Light, or WGL for short. He was with WGL for about 18 years, serving in a number of roles, including most recently Vice President of Growth and Customer Experience. We are also excited to be joined by Matt Erskine, who is Chief Strategy Officer at Connected DMV. Before joining Connected DMV, Matt served as a principal at Booz Allen and as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Economic Development and the Chief Operating Office for the U.S. Department of Commerce, U.S. Economic Development Administration. Rick and Matt, we are so excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us. To kick us off, why don't you talk to us a little bit about Connected DMV, what your mission is, and what you all are thinking about specifically with hydrogen.
All right, thanks, Sandi. So maybe a good place to start is the name, the DMV and Connected DMV, really representing DC, Maryland, and Virginia, as you spoke about, really thinking about our activities on a regional basis rather than any specific jurisdiction. We understand sort of in our region, the society and our economy really crosses the boundaries of our state jurisdictions. I use myself as an example. On any given day, I can wake up in DC, I drive to Virginia for work, I'm over to Maryland to pick my kid up from sports, and then maybe back to Virginia to grab dinner, and then ending up in DC. So as a result, we recognize that both our population, but also the challenges in our area really cross those lines. And so our response to those challenges need to be on a regional basis as well. So that's how we look at it. We are a nonprofit, a 501c3 organization with a focus really on a dual mandate of both economic renewal and social equity. And for us, these two principles really stand side by side, tied together. We believe you can't achieve one without the other. They really have to be linked. And operationally, we're set up to be a delivery function to support the many great organizations that exist in our region. And so most recently, we sort of coined ourselves as a do tank rather than a think tank with a kind of a focus on delivery of projects.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add is that what I think also what characterizes and differentiates us is that we are very much multi-sector, cross-sector. So our DNA is all about business, government at all levels, community, nonprofits, and academia coming together in a equal way, a co-equal way. There are many great organizations that work on behalf of our jurisdictions and our regions who tend to be in one or more of those silos. We bring those sectors together. And then the other thing that differentiates us, which will, I think, be the bulk of the conversation today, is we pursue the net new, which is what are those net new opportunities for the region, for the greater Washington region, for the DMV, and net new opportunities that address, the key challenges for us as a region, but also have a national and a global scope to them.
Before we dig in on the hydrogen part a little bit more, one question that I know you all have been asked in the past, and I think our listeners would be interested in as well, is when you think about the DMV area for Connected DMV, What kind of geographic scope are you looking at? Because Maryland and Virginia are large states, and the reach there could be quite broad.
I think a couple of ways. Maybe one is to refer to either Greater Washington or the National Capital Region, or both terms that have been used to express the sort of Greater Washington, D.C. area. So the city and those components of Northern Virginia and call maybe Western Maryland that sort of encompass that area. I think for the hydrogen piece, and we'll talk about this in more detail, I guess, as we move forward. I think we're kind of broadening that region a little bit to identify a couple of key contributors to the ecosystem. So we think about to the northeast about the Port of Baltimore, and to the southeast, really the Port of Virginia, and really maybe as far west as sort of the I-81 corridor because of its truck and shipping traffic. So I think broadly speaking, I think from a hydrogen perspective, that's how we're thinking about it.
That's great. And obviously there's a tremendous asset base here in the DMV, in the National Capital Region, in terms of both kind of technology, human capital, universities. I think, Matt, you mentioned kind of having universities in the consortium. So I get that. I also, the DO tank, it is a brilliant concept. I mean, for folks who are in and around DC and understand the idea of think tanks, thinking about policy and kind of theory sometimes, right, to actually be in the driver's seat and help effectuate the net new, as you called it. I think that's great.
And I might jump in there only to say that I think we complement the think tank, right? Because the valuable role that the think tank provides is a sort of setting of objectives, identifying goals and mandates. And we hope to be a supportive and complementary piece to that, where we can actually bring a capability to deliver on those great objectives.
That's great. So maybe digging down now into hydrogen more specifically, Sandi and I, of course, have had the pleasure of working with you guys and Connected DMV and working with the steering committee that's focused on hydrogen. But for our listeners, can you orient them a bit on how Connected DMV is thinking about hydrogen, the opportunity, the blueprint idea that you're moving forward, and then we can kind of go from there with questions.
Great. I think first and foremost, we view hydrogen as a climate solution and really the intersection of climate and energy. And as we were looking for a way to support the region's climate goals, we were trying to identify a way that we could leverage what we bring to the table, which is the sort of combined delivery experience and this coalition of the willing, if you will, that Matt described of these regional organizations. And really, because of the nascent stage of hydrogen market in our area, we recognize that combination of sectors, industry, government, community, academia, would all be valuable and maybe even required to sort of bring that market to fruition. So hydrogen seemed to make sense for us because of our capabilities to bring a new solution. And new is important there. We don't view hydrogen as a silver bullet or a replacement to all the great work that's already being done, renewables, building and energy efficiency. It's really just one more solution to help us be successful. And so we're an ally to those already existing initiatives. And we hope to find those areas where traditionally hard to decarbonize sectors where we can bring hydrogen as the additional solution to help us all be successful in the region.
And maybe just quickly on as a follow-up to that and probably a good transition. I mean, what are those demand sources in the DC area? I think, we don't have as much industry, kind of the hardest to abate sectors. You think of steel manufacturing, you think of cement, you think of those things. We don't have a lot of that. But so what are the demand sectors here?
Yeah, appreciate that question, because we have been spending a lot of time in the beginning stages of this initiative, which we're putting under this umbrella of the National Capital Hydrogen Center. Sort of that's the name to the capability. We've spent a lot of time on outreach activities to understand what are both the opportunities and the requirements of the market in the DMV. And so we've really identified a list of potential demand centers. We think about our public transportation, surface transportation. We have a couple of large airports in our area, so that can be not only the ground service equipment, the luggage carriers and the sort of the tow vehicles, but also the actual aircraft themselves in the form of aviation fuel. And there's other aviation opportunities also. Drones are an example, but also really at the very beginning and super exciting stage, I think, is this discussion of air taxis, which the Department of Transportation is looking into. We also mentioned we've got maritime. So not only the ports we described, but also we've got a ferry service here on the Anacostia and the Potomac River, which has some potential to transition. We've got a number of different rail components. We've got freight, passenger, and metro. When you look to our west and the data center cluster, we have huge presence of data centers in Loudoun County, sort of to the west of our city. So I think there's a big opportunity for resilient and sort of backup power opportunities. And along that line with backup power, defense and intelligence installations in our region, particularly critical to make sure we have uninterrupted and protected energy supplies. So that's another potential. There is some discussion about the fuel mixing in our natural gas distribution system. You mentioned manufacturing. We have a little bit of manufacturing, not a ton, but we have identified a handful of potential offtake opportunities in that space. We've got a huge presence of fleets, so delivery fleets, utility fleets. We've got warehousing, waste haulers. And then lastly, this is probably on the real cusp is really personal mobility. So is there a ride share or even scooter type of application, but maybe more significantly in support of the battery electric use for personal vehicles is EV charging, and having those EV chargers supplied by clean hydrogen seems to be an interesting opportunity. So really, maybe on first blush, as you say, we're not a manufacturing center, but there are quite a few opportunities for us to look for demand.
Building off of David's question, as you think about some of those opportunities for DMV within the National Capital Hydrogen Center umbrella, what are you seeing emerging in terms of potential timing for the development of demand for those areas of potential use?
Yeah, so timing is interesting. One of the things we think about timing is the importance of breaking this chicken and egg problem with supply and demand. So it's sort of as a macro comment, we believe that the timing of both production and consumption, but also the intervening called midstream concepts, transportation, storage, distribution, those are going to need to be brought to market in a timing close enough so that it makes sense to invest in both at a similar time. So that's maybe kind of a non-answer to the question of when we think it's going to happen, but I will make that remark about timing. And I think our initial focus is on kind of three areas: the airports and maritime ports, the public bus transports, and data centers. And those kind of have different time frames of siting and deploying that infrastructure. So I think our focus is primarily on, call it, flexibility and agility rather than on superior prognostication, if you will. So we'll be pursuing those with all vigor and really pushing as the technologies are available. We can get production into the region. So I think we're probably thinking on a scale of more like 18 months to 5 years rather than 6 months to 3 years. But there are some applications, certainly in a pilot stage, where we could be doing it far sooner to sort of set up perhaps a single fueling application or a smaller production section that can begin to get the ecosystem started, and then we'll look to work in the back of that. Now, maybe that's a nice teaser for the DMV hydrogen blueprint, which maybe I can talk about if I can borrow my own segue.
Yeah. Hey, and Rick, before you jump into that, I think on the timing question also, and you all see this in your work, the federal policy shift is underway in terms of both policy incentives and the federal funds and investment in this. I think we're going to see, we've already seen some initial steps with the administration, and I think we're going to continue to see, federal money and federal attention very much on this. And I think it's consistent with, as Rick said, both ensuring that the ecosystem is well funded and you have the policy around it, but it's also very much tied into, I think, what the president and the administration has been advancing in terms of security of supply chains, making sure, we've got energy security and with a portfolio approach, but the distinct pressure that it be a clean energy portfolio. I think we're going to continue. I think that's only going to continue in terms of the federal approach.
That was actually remarkable timing, Matt, because essentially shortly before we started this recording, Senator Joe Manchin, who, we all love to talk about, the second most powerful Joe in Washington, released his energy legislation. And I don't know if you've seen a copy of it yet, but there is an entire chapter now on hydrogen. And one of the provisions is the establishment of a program that will select 4 regional hydrogen hubs in the United States. And there's going to be, the legislation walks through a whole qualification process for how a region could qualify as one of these hubs. It'll be a solicitation that the government will put out. So, Connected DMV will be all over this, I'm sure. But it's pretty exciting. And this legislation seems pretty well thought out. One, I guess, quick point, he focuses on what he defines as clean hydrogen. And of course, that includes electrolytic hydrogen, green hydrogen, but it also includes expressly hydrogen produced from natural gas that includes carbon capture. And so one of the things I think we were curious about in our conversation with you today is on the production side. I mean, we talked about potential demand sources. On the production side, how the conversations that you all have been having at Connected DMV with the industry, how are you thinking about production? Is it on-site production? Are you talking to, the large utilities who are thinking about it? What does that look like at this point?
I think we're really thinking about the production along the lines of the benefits of a diversified portfolio, if you will, really hoping to maybe optimize is the right word, optimize the production for the region. So taking into consideration a number of factors, the volume that's required, siting and permitting requirements, resource availability for inputs, proximity to both end use and to storage, underserved community opportunities, I guess among other items there for consideration. But in order to sort of satisfy that optimal positioning for production, I think we're looking at a number of different ways to source hydrogen. We're in conversations with sourcing from nuclear, from the high temperature, high quality steam from nuclear, wind and solar production, natural gas with carbon capture. You mentioned that. There seems like there's a ton of interest there. We'd love to see if there's an opportunity for us to contribute to the advancement of that. We're also will be talking to landfill and wastewater and organic waste kind of opportunities, as well as even sourcing from ethanol as a place or a source to sort of crack hydrogen out of ethanol. So I think those, depending on those particular sources, will also then mean, are we talking about a sort of a central production that we are needing to potentially ship into the region or in close proximity versus on-site distributed production? And also the same will then go for the storage associated with those. Are we talking centralized storage or are we talking to on-site storage? And I think there's room for both. And I think our approach is really to identify what's the best way to serve the particular end use, and then identify the components of the value chain that we need to serve that in the most cost-effective way.
Rick and Matt, as you guys are thinking and as Connected DMV is thinking about those potential different models for production and the areas of potential demand for hydrogen in the DC metropolitan area, how are you engaging with stakeholders and kind of thinking about engagement with local governments and federal governments, and what steps is Connected DMV taking and maybe thinking about taking in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the operating model that we use across our initiatives that we do at Connected DMV, so I think you all are familiar, we have a strategic initiative on Global Pandemic Prevention Center, quantum computing, and it's the same approach we're using for hydrogen, which is bring together that set of cross-sector leaders, again, government at all levels, state, local, federal, We've engaged with a number of the national energy labs, the national labs, who obviously are very, very interested in this, and really across the federal government in terms of partners. And then as Rick has talked about, obviously with industry partners. So that's our DNA in terms of how we approach this, which is no one sector can do this, especially if we want to make this, one of the leading, if not the leading regional hubs in the United States for hydrogen. We've got to have the right community organizations at the table, ties in with, just if you think about the Airports Authority and Metro, the state governments, the local governments, and then going all the way up, as I said, to the federal government, Department of Energy and the lab. So that's our approach. It's all about how we bring the right partners to the table. And especially with something relatively nascent as this is, it's going to be key to do that. And I think Rick, you were going to talk about the blueprint, or what we've termed the Greenprint.
Right. This is an exclusive for the Hydrogen Rising podcast, and that is we've rebranded our blueprint / roadmap to be the DMV Hydrogen Greenprint.
I love that.
Love that. We love it. We love it. And you heard it here first, folks.
Correct. So thanks, Matt. That is one of the first deliverables coming out of the National Capital Hydrogen Center. And we view that really as a comprehensive forward-looking plan so that we set into motion what will be a sustainable infrastructure and ecosystem for hydrogen in the National Capital Region, rather than maybe a one-off project or sort of an interesting demo. And that deliverable is really going to be made up of two primary components, the first being an assessment and the second being a plan. And the assessment is really what I'm calling kind of putting numbers to the opportunity. Right? How much hydrogen could we produce and from what sources? How much hydrogen would we potentially use and in what sectors? What would the investment be to bring that to fruition? What kind of outcomes could we expect financially, societally, environmentally to sort of have as outcomes from that infrastructure? So that's really the assessment part of it. And then the second would be a plan. And that plan is more of an engineering activity that talks about how would we site the infrastructure that we would propose. So that's production, that's transportation, storage, distribution, and consumption clusters, so that we really optimize the deployment of that infrastructure for the benefit of all of our communities. And I think that's another important part of not only the Greenprint, but also this engagement that you just asked about, Sandi, and that is we are engaging actively with environmental groups, with environmental justice advocates to really understand how can we integrate those concepts, not only in the end results, but also in the planning activities we're undertaking and the deployment activities, as well as the outcomes, so that we really find ourselves providing those kinds of benefits across the region and to all communities.
That's great. And I think the EJ component in particular, environmental justice, is so significant. Obviously, this administration, the Biden administration, is intensely focused on that across not just energy, but across all sectors of government. So certainly pleased to hear Connected DMV's focus on that. I think it's really important. Sandi, how are we on time? Are we, we're I think nearing the end. Any, I guess, kind of last points that you all would want our listeners to know about? Or, I assume there's a Connected DMV website that folks could go to check out what you're doing and get in touch.
Your listeners can go to our website, connecteddmv.org, and we will soon have up there, there's information up there, but we're going to be launching here in the next few days the National Capital Center Hydrogen Center landing page, which will have information about our current steering committee, a lot of the information that we shared today, sort of additional information around the Greenprint and the project, and ways to get in touch with Rick and the team. Rick is the initiative lead to become a sponsor, express interest in serving on the steering committee, getting engaged, because we're going to need that involvement from leaders to make this a success.
And we talked about this focus on stakeholders. We're really interested in getting engaged with all stakeholders who have an interest in the hydrogen space in our region. So we're happy and delighted to take any discussions, phone calls, video calls, meetings that folks have an opportunity or an interest in getting in touch with us and talking about what we're doing, and maybe also providing information about what they're doing so we can identify areas to collaborate.
Thank you both for all of the information on Connected DMV. I'm sure we could continue this conversation quite a bit longer and actually love to have you come back to the show and
definitely
talk more about the projects and what Connected DMV is doing. So thank you, Matt and Rick, for joining us today.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you, as always, to our listeners for joining us today. Please check out the Hydrogen Handbook. It's a free resource available at klgates.com/hydrogen. It covers the legal, regulatory, commercial, and policy issues that we think the hydrogen industry will face. And it includes chapters on Australia, the European Union, Germany, France, Japan, Singapore, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And we're planning to release a chapter on the Middle East very shortly. If you have questions about any of the topics that we discussed today, please don't hesitate to reach out, and stay tuned for the next episode of Hydrogen Rising coming your way in just 2 weeks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hydrogen Rising. Be sure to subscribe to receive timely notifications of future episodes, and check out our market-leading publication, the Hydrogen Handbook, on our website at www.klgates.com.